An ignorant fool thinks the world appearance is real. The world appearance is a confusion, even as the blueness of the sky is an optical illusion. What is the nature of existence? What is the true nature of existence? How did the cosmos start? Where is the beginning? So, to tell you this, we'll go in a scientific manner. 13.8 billion years ago, we had the Big Bang, and this is as per the best scientific understanding of the day. So, before the Big Bang, what should have existed? Something should have existed. And the size of the whole universe was contained in a very small space before the Big Bang, and that is from where the whole universe came into being. So fundamentally, before that, what should have existed? We see that energy and mass can coexist. There is a mass energy balance equation. So E equals mc square. So energy equals mass multiplied by the square of the speed of light. We'll go with a very broad understanding of this principle to see if energy happens first or mass happens first. If mass is 0, you are multiplying it with infinity. And is there a possibility that you can have energy? So to understand this, say I'll take E equals any value, say 100. 100 divided by infinity should be the mass. So 100 by infinity would be almost 0. So even for a very small amount of mass, the energy used was huge. So if I have to get 1 kilo mass, what is the amount of energy that should be involved? Say we are assuming energy happens first. If I have a kilo mass, then I have to multiply it with infinite, that is c square, to get energy that was used into creating this unit mass. But what if the energy that I have is 0? If energy is 0, you are multiplying mc square to get 0. What is the mass that can possibly exist? Mc square equals 0, which means m should be equal to 0. Or if you are dividing 0 by c square, that is the value of m, which is something that does not exist, is again divided into infinite parts. This cannot happen, which means energy precedes any mass. Mass is something that is perceived in the dimension of our senses. But the energy that gave rise to mass, from an existence point of view, did by pure will. That pure will of that energy continues to exist in every living organism and non-living organism that has any mass. And this energy consciousness that gave rise to the dimension of mass or matter has also made it such that anything that originates in this dimension is able to perceive only this dimension. For example, my eyes, my ears have originated in this particular dimension of the energy. So they perceive this dimension of the energy. It is pretty simple. This energy has the potential to give rise to so many different universes like this, which would have dimensions unrelatable to the dimension of our existence. And you should also note that there is no brick without sand. You can't have an earring without gold in it, a gold bangle without gold in it. In the same way, you cannot have anything without this energy dimension incorporated into it. So what exists is just this consciousness that pervades into everything and has no beginning and has no end. Now coming to the concept of time, why doesn't it have a beginning and why is there not an end? The theory of relativity, in simple words, tells you that when you are around a massive object, time moves slower. So when the object's mass is very huge and you are with the object, the time gets slowed down. So back at a point of time before the Big Bang, when all the universe existed in a minuscule amount of space, the amount of mass it should have had is mass of the whole universe that we perceive. When this amount of mass is taken into consideration, time comes to a standstill. There's no past, there's no future, there's no present, there's no concept of time. Time is simply zero always. Now, how do you realize the inner nature of yourself, the nature of this infinite consciousness? Getting to the realization of what this consciousness is, to do that, you have to stop your mind. You have to stop your mind. The mind cannot stay in present tense. It always has to ponder upon something that would happen in the future or analyze something that happened in the past. In perfect present tense, there is awareness, pure awareness, awareness only. There is no thought. This thoughtless supreme state is when you realize that all that is in you, is in everything, is the homogeneous consciousness which has no beginning, no end. It always stays. Irrespective of what happens to this dimension, and the consciousness is not really concerned about what happens here, what you do or what I do or whatever happens. In fact, me and you are not different from the consciousness. We are the same energy consciousness that got evolved into this form. The beauty of human mind is its ability to find paths that will keep the body comfortable. But this same thing could be to our disadvantage. When longing starts, when longing for comfort starts, a person who accepts things as it comes is not moved by pain or pleasure, is neither related nor depressed with respect to the external circumstances that befall him, is in a very high plane of spiritual existence. Now, since we know that energy predates mass, mass is only one particular dimension in which this energy could manifest. How do I have the ability to act upon my decision? How do I make a decision? Is it that God makes that decision or did I make it? The basic idea here is the consciousness by pure will, it simply manifested into the cosmos. And this pure will that is there is carried on into everything that you see, not as parts of it, not as a whole, but all that exists is just the consciousness itself. It is various forms. I could tell you, imagine there's a huge cloth, and when the wind blows, the cloth moves. The whole cloth moves along with the wind, and if the breeze is in the opposite direction, it will move in the opposite direction. So if there's a small spot on this cloth where you put a virtual frame of reference around that point, and then whatever movements happen within that frame, you consider it as a subject, and that frame refers to everything out of that frame as the object. You have the subject-object relationship. That is how that frame sees itself as different from the cloth. But if the cloth moves, the frame definitely has to move. And the frame is something imaginary. It can be here today and somewhere else tomorrow. And due to the latent movements of that particular frame, it can continue to move on. And the shape of the frame might change. So this is what happens with existence. I have a frame that is a body. This body is not me. I is simply a virtual program, say for example. If I have to compare it with a program, then I is something virtual. It is just a function. It is an instance that is run. So this particular frame has senses that perceive and communicate with your brain. There's no mind devoid of consciousness. So you should understand that there's no mind, there's only consciousness. If there's no mind, your senses are faking it. Your senses are reporting to the mind, which means mind is telling you what is desirable and what is not desirable. When mind itself is consciousness, how can the inputs it receives be any worthwhile? To understand the nature of the existence, previously I've told about concentrating on the point where the breath that goes in merges into the breath that comes out. During this merger, there's a state, we call it a kumbhaka. In this particular state, there's no sorrow, there's no grief. When you breathe out and you observe the breath that goes out becoming the breath that comes in, when you look at that merger and you suspend your breath there, you breathe out and then suspend your breath there before you breathe in, effortlessly. Your mind stops. A person who breathes in suspends himself freely before he breathes out is not born again. A person who breathes out to a distance of a 12-finger width, say 12-finger width, and then suspends his breath there effortlessly, will have no grief, there's no sorrow. Whatever happened to him in the dimension perceived by the senses makes no difference to him. A person who practices this will get dissolved into the infinite consciousness. Will see no dualities, will see no pain or pleasure, and will simply respond to the situations that he falls into as he should be, doing his actions just because he should be doing it. He is not involved in them, nor are the actions involved in him. There's no involvement, there's no desire, there's no wish, there's no target. There's nothing to be done and there's nothing not to be done. There's no good and there's no evil. Everything simply happens just as the waves of an ocean reach the shore. It simply keeps happening. And this is how he perceives the world. Any changes, any wealth, anything that he sees in this world, perceives in this world, effectively is nothing to him. He stays fixed in that consciousness which is all pervading. Well, I've told you this, I have to tell you another way of realizing the Supreme Consciousness. Imagine yourself to be hollow from within. The skin that you have, the body, is just a layer, a thin layer that is covering a space that is empty within, and there's a space that is empty outside, and it is hollow completely within, and there's just light filling you. There's nothing more than that. When you can see the whole existence like this and stay in this vision, you have the vision of the Supreme. And if you can simultaneously suspend your breath in one of these two kumbhakas that I just told you, the state of joy you are in is not joy. There are no words for it in any language for that matter. It is the bliss of the bliss. Because the mind of the mind, the breath of the breath, the spirit of the spirit is the consciousness. And you are living in that consciousness, which means you have joy of the joy, the bliss of the bliss. So it goes on like that in endless circles. The problem with people who get into these dimensions of pursuit is twofolded. One is their strong desire to attain a state of higher consciousness. The desire to attain a higher spiritual state itself is what pushes you back, is what stops you from reaching that state, because you have a desire there. Thoughtlessness, the supreme void, is the root for spiritual growth. Once the thought, initiation itself is stopped, because the mind is stopped, and the mind is stopped, then you are observing the Kumbhaka, the supreme peace, the divine being that is already manifest in you is seen by you. Just realize the Supreme Being is already within you, within me. We are homogeneous. How different you are from me, or this stone or brick or water or sand is different from me, is just as good as if I pick a vessel that has milk in it and I pick two different spots, and one spot thinks of itself as the subject and objectifies the other spot. This is how we have come to communicate, as if I am different from you. In essence, the both dots are just milk. So in essence, me or you or anybody else, if you are running away from me or you are coming close to me, it is just the frame that is coming close or going away. There's no difference happening to the consciousness that pervades everything. It always stays. So me or you or everything is just a homogeneous mixture. But subject to a lot of illusion in this dimension. So what really exists is just the Supreme Being. Any religion, any practice that tells you to search for God outside of yourself is not a religion. It is a cult that brainwashes you into being a low-life beast that you would become by following that practice. God exists everywhere. Yes, because the energy consciousness does exist everywhere. God cannot be comprehended. Yes, because this is one particular dimension of the nature of God that has matter and senses and the way we perceive everything around us. And from that particular dimension, we are a small object that is trying to perceive the nature of the whole origin of this whole cosmos itself. So it is not perceptible to us, our senses or the mind. But it is perceivable to the inner consciousness that is pervading within us because it is itself. We should also note that we know of particles that have zero mass. A photon has no mass but has energy. There's no particle or anything that exists that has zero energy but some other form of existence. So when I say the apara shakti of the Brahman is what manifests itself into all that exists by pure will, I mean to tell you that apara means a lot of, that is infinite. Infinite to the infinite. Shakti means the energy. That is the energy dimension I spoke of. From there, just by pure will, the dimension of matter came into existence. Matter is perceived by us. So, in reality, all that exists is that energy dimension itself. One who is enlightened sees the world as oneself. The ignorant does not see it as oneself, and he engages himself in endless arguments. The enlightened is friendly with all. Turiya or Samadhi is the natural state which is what exists in and through the wakeful, the dream, and the sleep states. Conditioning alone is the mind, which ceases when you inquire into it. He who is not swayed by the craving for pleasure is known as perfectly enlightened, a Sambuddha. Such perfect enlightenment arises out of supreme peace from the complete turning away of pleasures, from moving away from the pursuit of pleasure. This is possible. He who rests in the self does not experience craving at all. Desire for pleasure experiences only arise when the movement away from the self happens. At the conclusion of the study of scripture, one should get into Samadhi. After the practice of Samadhi, again one should study and one should rest in Nirvana at all times. Wealth is the source of endless misfortune. Prosperity is perpetual adversity. Enjoyment of pleasure is enduring disease. All these are misunderstood by the perverse intellect. In the world, contentment alone is the best medicine, the best tonic, and the greatest good fortune. The contented heart is ready for enlightenment. First turn away from worldliness, then practice satsanga. Inquire into the truth of the scriptures and cultivate disinterest. Be disinterested in pleasure and you will attain the supreme